Mark Thompson, a high-ranking detective with the city police department, had seen his fair share of difficult cases. But today was different. Today, he had been given a direct order from his superiors, an order that didn't sit well with him. They needed to steal something. His department wasn't accustomed to criminal activities, and Mark had always prided himself on walking the fine line between law and order. But this was a special case. What had been taken was of great importance to national security, and the pressure to retrieve it was mounting. His team was out of their depth. Sitting at his desk, Mark rubbed his forehead, trying to process the weight of it all. "How the hell do we pull this off?" he muttered to himself. Across the room, his wife, Asha, sat quietly, sorting through reports. She was a doctor, highly respected in her field, and had never been involved in Mark's world of law enforcement. But she knew him well enough to recognize when something was bothering him. "What's going on?" Asha asked, looking up from her work. Mark sighed, pushing the papers aside. "They've tasked us with stealing something. I know it sounds crazy, but I can't refuse the order. We need someone who knows how to get in and out without leaving a trace, and none of us have that skill." Asha leaned back in her chair, a mixture of confusion and concern on her face. "Steal? Mark, your department doesn't." "I know," Mark interrupted. "But we don't have a choice. It's either we get it back or things are going to get ugly." Asha's eyes narrowed as she processed his words. She knew he would never ask for help unless it was absolutely necessary, and this sounded dire. "I think I know someone," she said cautiously. Mark's head snapped up. "Who?" Asha hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "It's someone I trust. Someone who can get things done. But it's not someone who does this for a living. They have a team and they're good. Very good." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Who are you talking about?" Asha hesitated again, glancing down at her hands before finally meeting his gaze. "My sister, Arya. She has a way of getting things we wouldn't be able to find. She's not exactly a law-abiding citizen, Mark. But she's got a team that works on the black market. If anyone can help us, it's her." Mark blinked, stunned by the revelation. "Asha, your sister is involved in—" "I've known for a long time," Asha interrupted quietly. "She's not just a thief, Mark. She does it because she's good at it. I don't agree with her choices, but if you want to get the job done, you need to talk to her. She's the only one who can help." Mark was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the information. He had trusted Asha with everything, but this? He had never expected her sister, the one he knew so little about, to be the answer. But Asha was right. There was no one else who could pull this off. "All right," Mark said, standing up and adjusting his jacket. "I'll talk to her. But if this goes south, I don't want you involved." Asha nodded. "I know, Mark. Just be careful." Later that day, Arya sat in her usual spot at the local cafe, enjoying a quiet moment before her team gathered for their next job. She had built her reputation as a professional thief over the years, earning respect from the black market and the underground world of high-risk heists. But as much as she thrived in the thrill of the chase, she had always kept her two worlds separate, the one where she was a thief and the one where she was Asha's sister, the innocent, respectable twin. She didn't know how much longer she could keep both sides of her life hidden. Her skills were becoming too well known, and with the pressure from her team to take on bigger, riskier jobs, she knew that her secret life was bound to surface sooner or later. But she had no idea that today would be the day it all came crashing together. Mark entered the cafe, his eyes scanning the room before landing on her. She recognized him immediately, Asha's husband, the detective who had no idea what his wife's sister was truly capable of. He approached cautiously, his brow furrowed in thought. "Arya," Mark said, his voice low, as he sat across from her. "We need to talk." Arya's eyes narrowed. "What's this about?" "I'm asking for your help," Mark said bluntly, his gaze steady. "We've been given an order to steal something, and we have no idea how to go about it. I'm not asking for favors here, but Asha told me you might be able to help. You've got the skills, and we need someone who knows how to get in and out without leaving a trace." Arya stared at him, her mind racing. She had never expected Mark to come to her for help, especially not for something like this. She had always kept her thieving life a secret, but now, with Mark's request, that was no longer possible. "You want me to help you steal some things?" Arya asked, her voice cool, though her pulse quickened. "And Asha knows about this?" Mark nodded. "She told me you're the only one who can do it." A bitter laugh escaped Arya's lips. "She knows, huh?" "Of course she does. She knows all about me, Mark." "She knows exactly what I do." Mark looked uneasy, but he didn't back down. "We don't have any other options. This job, it's critical. We need someone who can get us in and out, no questions asked." Arya leaned back in her chair, her eyes studying Mark carefully. She didn't trust the situation, but she also knew that refusing him would only make things more complicated for Asha. It was clear that Asha was caught in the middle of something she had no control over. "All right," Arya said after a long pause. "I'll help you, but it's on my terms. No surprises. And if this goes wrong, I'm out." Mark nodded, grateful for her willingness to help. "We can do that. Just tell me what you need." As Arya agreed to help, she couldn't shake the feeling that this job would be more than just another heist. There was something bigger at play, and for the first time, she feared that her double life might not stay a secret much longer. Arya sat back in her chair, staring at Mark with a piercing gaze. She had agreed to help, but her mind was already calculating the risks. The last thing she wanted was to drag her sister any deeper into her world of shadows. But Asha had made it clear, this wasn't just another case. It was a mission that had to be handled by someone who knew the game. And that someone was her. "So, what exactly is it you need me to steal?" Arya asked, crossing her arms. Her eyes were sharp, a clear indication that she wasn't about to dive into anything without knowing all the details. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly out of his element. "It's a government document. I don't know the specifics, but I'm sure you can figure it out. We just need to retrieve it. The higher-ups are pressuring us, and we've hit a dead end." Arya's mind was already running through the possibilities. Government documents weren't exactly her usual targets, but the stakes were high. It wasn't just about the thrill anymore. It was about protecting Asha and, indirectly, protecting Mark from the consequences of his involvement. "Where's it located?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. Mark hesitated. "It's secured in a private facility. I don't know the exact location, but Asha mentioned you had the right connections, and your team could get in." Arya's expression softened slightly at the mention of Asha. She could feel the tension in Mark's voice, the stress of the situation weighing on him. But Arya was no fool. She had a knack for reading people, and she could tell there was something Mark wasn't telling her. The urgency in his eyes didn't match the details he was giving. "I'll need more than that, Mark," Arya replied coolly. "I need the blueprints, security schedules, anything you have." Mark nodded, finally conceding. "I'll get that to you. I know a guy who can get the info you need, but it'll take some time." Arya considered this for a moment, then stood up from the table. "All right then, I'll gather my team. But I need to know this. If anything goes wrong, I'm out. I'm not going down for something that's not mine to own." Mark's face tightened, but he understood. "Fair enough. We'll do this your way." With a final glance at Mark, Arya turned and walked out of the cafe, her mind already working on the logistics. She needed her team, and she needed them now. That evening, Arya convened with her crew in a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Her team consisted of 4 people: Jace, the hacker; Elena, the expert lockpicker; Dax, the muscle; and finally, herself, the mastermind. Each of them had a role to play, and together, they were nearly unstoppable. "All right, listen up," Arya said as she paced in front of them. "We've got a job, and it's a big one. Government documents, high security, high risk. We're getting in and out without leaving a trace. No questions asked." Jace raised an eyebrow, tapping away on his laptop. "Government job? That's a whole new level. What's the catch?" Arya stopped in front of him, her expression hardening. "No questions, Jace. Just your job. Get us the intel. We'll make sure you're paid well." Elena, sitting off to the side, spoke up next. "I'm assuming this isn't just another smash and grab, right? What's the security like?" "We don't know yet," Arya replied, turning to her. I need to get the blueprints and security schedules. Once we have that, we'll plan the heist. But it's not going to be easy. The location's locked down, and the people who hired me are desperate. Dax, who had been quiet until now, leaned forward, his arms crossed. What's our exit strategy? Arya smiled grimly. I'm not taking any risks. We'll get in, get what we need, and get out.
Clean.
No footprints. We can't afford to make any mistakes. She looked around at her team, making sure each one understood the gravity of the situation. She trusted them, but there was always the chance something would go wrong. The stakes were higher than ever. Over the next few days, Mark kept his word. He met Arya several times, giving her the information she needed: blueprints of the facility, security schedules, guard rotations. Arya and her team worked in secrecy, planning the heist down to the smallest detail. But as the day of the job approached, Arya couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She didn't like the idea of working so closely with Mark's department, and she didn't like the fact that her sister's husband was involved in this mess. The last thing she wanted was for Asha to find out the truth. The night before the heist, Arya sat alone in her apartment, reviewing the plans one final time. She ran her fingers over the blueprint, tracing the paths they would take through the facility. Everything had to be perfect. One mistake, and everything could fall apart. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark. We have a problem. They've moved the document. It's no longer at the original location. Arya's stomach dropped. She had expected complications, but not this. She quickly typed back, "Where is it now?" Mark's reply came almost instantly. "I don't know, but I'll find out. We can't back out now. We need you." Arya stood up, her mind racing. She had no intention of backing out, but now the job was even riskier. If the document had been moved, it could be anywhere, and that meant they were running out of time. As she paced the room, she heard a knock on the door. Her heart skipped a beat. It was too early for the team to arrive. She opened the door cautiously, only to find Asha standing there, looking concerned. "Hey," Asha said softly, stepping inside. "I know something's going on, Arya. I can feel it." Arya's heart sank. She had kept her sister at arm's length for so long, but now, standing in her apartment, Asha was closer to the truth than ever. "Asha, Arya began, but her voice faltered. She wasn't prepared to lie to her sister again, not when everything was on the line. Asha looked her in the eye, sensing the tension in the air. "I know, Arya. I know what you're doing, and I don't want you to get caught up in something you can't control." Arya swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have a choice. I'm already in, Asha. And I'm not backing out." Asha's eyes softened, but there was a hint of worry there. "Just be careful. You're all I have left. Don't let this destroy you." Arya didn't know how to respond. She didn't know if she could keep her secret any longer, but she knew one thing for sure. This job was bigger than either of them realized, and the stakes were higher than ever. As Asha left, Arya stood in the doorway, staring after her sister. The clock was ticking, and the job had just gotten a whole lot more dangerous. The following night, Arya stood in the shadows outside the high-security government facility, her heart racing with anticipation. The air was cold, a light breeze rustling through the empty street, but she barely noticed. The adrenaline coursing through her veins kept her focused, her mind sharp. Her team had arrived earlier, and now they were all in position, ready to execute the plan. The document, whatever it was now located in a new facility, just as Mark had said. This wasn't a simple job anymore. She had no idea what they were really after, but she didn't need to. All that mattered was getting in and getting out without leaving a trace. She checked her watch. It was 1 a.m. The night guard shifts were about to change, which meant it was their window of opportunity. The team had practiced every detail, and now was the time to put everything into action. Arya turned to Dax, who was waiting at the back in trance, his massive frame blending into the darkness. "You know the drill," she said, her voice low but commanding. Dax gave a small nod, his dark eyes focused on the task ahead. "I'll make sure the perimeter is clear. Don't worry about me." "Good," Arya replied, then turned to Elena and Jace, who were standing beside her. Elena was already slipping a small set of tools into her pockets, ready for anything that required quick action. Jace was focused on his laptop, his fingers flying over the keys as he worked on disabling the security system. "We're good to go," Jace said, looking up with a grin. "I've disabled the alarms, but I won't be able to keep the system down for long. We've got about 30 minutes before they figure it out." Arya nodded, her mind moving quickly. "That's all we need." The team moved silently toward the entrance, where the security guards were just about to change shifts. Elena quickly and expertly unlocked the door, and they slipped inside. Inside the facility, the air smelled sterile and cold, a stark contrast to the tension building within Arya. The high-tech security systems were impressive, but they were nothing her team couldn't handle. They had done their research and knew the building's layout better than the guards did. "Follow me," Arya whispered, leading them through the darkened hallways. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they moved like shadows through the corridors. She could feel her pulse quicken. The job had been set in motion, and there was no turning back now. They passed several rooms, each one sealed tight with layers of security. Arya's focus remained unwavering, her eyes scanning every detail. It wasn't the guards she feared, it was the unpredictability of the situation. There was always the chance that something could go wrong. She couldn't afford any mistakes. They arrived at the final security door, where the document was being held. Elena immediately went to work, picking the lock with practiced ease, her fingers moving like lightning. "This is it," Elena whispered as she slid the door open. Inside the room, it was quiet, except for the low hum of the climate control system. The document was stored in a high-security vault, protected by layers of technology. Arya felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This was the moment. The last hurdle. Jace was already setting up his equipment to disable the vault's locking system. "We've got maybe 20 minutes before they notice the breach," he muttered, his eyes flicking nervously to the security cameras that lined the walls. Arya stepped forward, her gaze scanning the vault. It was state-of-the-art, but she had done her homework. With a few adjustments, the system could be bypassed. "I'll handle it," she said. Jace nodded, and Elena stepped back to cover their exit route. Arya's hands flew over the keypad, her heart thumping in her chest. She could hear the faint clicking of the lock as the system unlocked, and she allowed herself a moment of relief. They were in. Inside, the document lay in a protective case, gleaming under the dim light. Arya reached forward, carefully lifting the case from its resting place. She didn't take a moment to look at it. She knew what she was there for, and that was enough. "We've got it," she said softly, but her voice was filled with a strange sense of finality. They'd come this far, but the hardest part was still ahead. As they made their way back to the exit, Arya could hear the distant sound of footsteps approaching. The guards were making their rounds, and the pressure was mounting. They were running out of time. "Move," Arya hissed, as they quickly retraced their steps. They made it back to the back exit, where Dax was waiting, eyes alert for any sign of trouble. But just as they were about to slip through the door, a loud alarm pierced the silence. Jace's voice came through their earpieces, frantic. "They've figured it out. The system's been reactivated. We've got maybe 5 minutes." Arya's mind raced. 5 minutes wasn't nearly enough time. The building was crawling with security, and the only way out was through the front, where they'd be caught in seconds. She glanced at Dax, who gave her a grim nod. The plan was changing now, but they had no choice. "Cover our backs," Arya ordered. "We need to move fast." Dax led the way, using his size to push through the hallway, knocking guards out of their path when necessary. Elena was right behind him, her lockpicking skills coming into play as she disabled the doors that would slow them down. As they rounded the final corner, Arya's heart sank. The main entrance was directly ahead, but the guards had already sealed it off, blocking their way. The only escape route now was the rooftop. "Up, now!" Arya barked, and the team followed her lead, sprinting toward the staircase that led to the roof. The rooftop was cold, and Arya could feel the wind biting at her skin. The sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder as time slipped away. There was only one way out, the helicopter waiting at the edge of the building. She took a deep breath. This was their last chance. "Dax, clear the rooftop," Arya said. Elena, Jace, get to the chopper. I'll cover the rear. The team quickly moved into position, with Dax standing guard as Elena and Jace rushed toward the helicopter, their steps quick and urgent. Arya could hear the footsteps of the guards getting closer, but she didn't flinch. This was the moment she'd been preparing for her entire life. The stakes had never been higher. As the helicopter's blades began to spin, Arya took one last look at the facility below. Her pulse was racing, but she felt an odd sense of calm wash over her. They had made it this far. But just as she turned to follow her team, a sharp voice shouted from below. Freeze! Police! The sirens were blaring, and in that moment, Arya knew that the hardest part was just beginning. The roar of the helicopter's blades was deafening, but it did little to drown out the chaos unfolding below. Arya's heart raced as she sprinted toward the edge of the rooftop, her eyes scanning the horizon. The police were closing in fast, and the sirens grew louder by the second. Their escape had to be flawless, or it would all fall apart. Behind her, Dax was already positioning himself at the base of the stairs, making sure they wouldn't be followed too quickly. Elena and Jace were almost at the chopper, and Arya could see the pilot, a trusted ally, signaling them to hurry. But that nagging voice in her head told her that time was running out. Move, Arya. Dax shouted from the stairs. We don't have much time. She pushed herself harder, the adrenaline burning through her veins. As she reached the edge of the building, she glanced over her shoulder one last time. The authorities were storming the building. This was no longer just a simple heist, it was a race for survival. The helicopter's searchlight blazed across the rooftop, cutting through the darkness and casting long shadows. Arya could already feel the tension mounting. The team was almost in, but they still had to cross the rooftop with no cover. One mistake, one slip-up, and it would all come crashing down. Without hesitation, Arya leaped into the chopper, followed closely by Elena and Jace. Dax was last, his bulky form sliding into the seat beside her. As the helicopter's blades lifted them into the air, Arya's pulse was still racing, the pressure of the situation pressing against her chest. Go, now, she shouted to the pilot. The helicopter lurched forward, shooting into the night sky, its lights flashing against the buildings below. Arya didn't allow herself to relax until they were high above the city, the ground disappearing into the distance. But even then, she knew they weren't out of danger yet. Dax, you're up, Arya said, her voice steady despite the chaos still swirling inside her. We need to make sure we're not being followed. Jace, can you track the movements? Jace nodded, his fingers already dancing over the controls of his laptop. I've got a signal from the police vehicles. They're trying to track us, but it's going to take a while for them to triangulate. We got at least 10 minutes before they figure it out. Arya's eyes flicked to the horizon. It wasn't enough time, but it was all they had. She turned to Dax. Take the controls. I need to make sure we're not being tracked. Dax raised an eyebrow but said nothing as he moved to the pilot's seat. He had been in tight situations before, and he knew the risks that came with their line of work. Arya trusted him to get them out of this. After all, he was the best at handling a helicopter in tricky situations. Arya turned back to Jace. He was already typing furiously, his eyes glued to the screen as he tried to cover their tracks. I've scrambled their ability to track us, but we need to be careful, Jace warned. If they get a hold of a satellite or radio signal, they might be able to pinpoint our location. Arya nodded. She didn't need to hear the details. They all knew what was at stake. One slip, and they could all end up in the hands of the authorities. And that wasn't a place any of them wanted to be. The next 20 minutes were a blur of tension and silence. Arya stared out the window, her eyes narrowed, scanning the city below for any sign of movement. The chopper's blades cut through the night air, the rhythmic hum almost hypnotic. But Arya wasn't fooled. She knew they had to be prepared for anything. We need to land, Arya said after a long silence, breaking the stillness. We can't stay in the air much longer. The police will get smart, and they'll track us down if we keep circling. Dax didn't need to be told twice. He began navigating the chopper toward a small, secluded airstrip on the outskirts of the city, away from prying eyes. It wasn't a popular landing spot, but it would do for now. As they touched down, and the helicopter blades slowed, Arya felt a small wave of relief. They weren't out of the woods yet, but they were one step closer to safety. The next phase of the plan would be just as dangerous, but Arya was prepared. She always was. The team disembarked from the helicopter, stepping onto the small tarmac with practiced ease. Arya kept her eyes on the sky, watching for any sign of pursuit, but the darkness provided them with the cover they needed. They were still in the clear, for now. "All right, here's the deal," Arya said as she gathered her team around. "We need to lay low for a while. We'll split up and take different routes. Dax, you're with me. Jace, Elena, you two stay together and head to the safe house. We'll meet up in 3 days." The team nodded in agreement, but there was an unspoken tension in the air. They all knew this wasn't just another job. This was a turning point. The authorities would be looking for them, and their time to hide was running out. "Don't contact me unless it's an emergency," Arya added, her voice low. "And don't trust anyone. There's a chance that the people who hired us aren't who they said they were." Jace raised an eyebrow, but Elena was the one who spoke up. "You think we've been played? By Mark?" Arya's eyes hardened. She didn't want to believe it, but she couldn't ignore the growing suspicion that something wasn't right. "I don't know, but I intend to find out." The next few days were filled with paranoia. Arya and Dax moved from safe house to safe house, careful to avoid any contact with the outside world. The others did the same, each one maintaining a low profile while they waited for the dust to settle. Arya couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them, that they were being tracked, even though Jace had scrambled all the signals. It was a strange, gnawing feeling that kept her up at night. She spent hours thinking about Mark and Asha, wondering how deep they were in this mess. It wasn't until the 3rd day that Arya received the message. It came from an anonymous burner phone. The text was simple, but the implications were clear. "We know what you took. Meet us or everyone dies." Arya felt the blood drain from her face. Whoever was behind this knew exactly what they were dealing with. And now they were making it personal. The message burned into Arya's mind. She had read it over and over again, trying to make sense of it. Whoever had sent it knew too much about the heist, about the document, and about her team. But there was something else, something personal in the words that she couldn't shake off. The message wasn't just a threat. It felt deliberate. It felt like someone was toying with her. Arya sat in the dim light of the safe house, staring at the screen of her burner phone. Her fingers hovered over the keys, unsure of how to respond. She could feel Dax watching her from the corner of the room, his eyes narrowed, waiting for any sign of a plan. But Arya wasn't ready to make any decisions just yet. "Who do you think it is?" Dax's voice broke the silence, his low tone filled with concern. He knew Arya better than anyone and could tell when something was off. This wasn't just about the heist anymore. This was personal. Arya let out a long, frustrated breath. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out. We can't afford to wait around and hope this blows over. Whoever this is, they know more than they should. It's not just about the money anymore. This is a game, and they want to see me squirm." "You think it's connected to Mark?" Dax asked, his brow furrowing. Arya's mind flashed back to her last encounter with Mark. He had been just as calm and composed as ever, his expression unreadable. She hadn't trusted him completely, not after Asha's cryptic words about him, but she hadn't been prepared for what the truth might look like. "I don't know," Arya muttered. The footsteps behind Arya were like a death knell in the tense silence of the warehouse. Her mind raced as she turned, instinctively reaching for the weapon at her side. But when she saw the person stepping into the dim light, her breath hitched. Mark stood in the doorway, his face unreadable, his eyes shadowed with a mixture of confusion and something darker. For a moment, the world around Arya seemed to stop, her heart pounding in her chest. "Mark," she whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his gaze flicked to his brother, who was standing with a smug grin, as if this entire moment was exactly what he had been waiting for. Mark's brother spoke first, his voice dripping with mockery. "I knew you wouldn't figure it out on your own, Arya." Mark, on the other hand, is a little too trusting for his own good. Mark's jaw tightened, and his eyes shifted toward his brother before returning to Arya, his expression pained. Arya, I didn't know. I swear. I thought I was doing the right thing. I trusted him. Arya's eyes searched his face, looking for any sign of deceit, but all she saw was confusion, regret. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Mark was in this too deep. But was he a victim, or was he playing her the whole time? I don't know who to trust anymore, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Your brother, he's been pulling the strings, Mark. He's been manipulating everything, making us all pawns in his game. Mark looked back at his brother, his gaze hardening. What have you done, Jeremy? This wasn't the plan. I never wanted any of this. Jeremy's lips curled into a smile, as if he found Mark's apparent betrayal amusing. Oh, Mark. You were never meant to be in charge. You've always been the obedient little soldier, the one who does as he's told. I needed someone like you. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. Arya clenched her fists, her mind spinning. She had trusted Mark. She had wanted to believe in him, despite all the warnings. But now, the truth was undeniable. Mark had been involved, even if it was unwittingly. I tried to protect you, Mark said, his voice low, as if the words were cutting him from the inside. But everything's twisted now. I didn't know Jeremy was planning all this. I thought he was just, he trailed off, his voice cracking with emotion. Arya shook her head, the betrayal settling like a cold stone in her chest. It doesn't matter anymore, Mark. What matters now is stopping him. Jeremy took a step forward, his eyes gleaming with dark amusement. Oh, I don't think you're in a position to stop anything. This is over. I'm in control now, and he pointed at Arya, you've outlived your usefulness. Before Arya could react, Jeremy pulled a small device from his pocket and pressed a button. Arya's heart skipped a beat as the familiar hum of a timer began to tick in the silence. What is that? Arya demanded, her pulse spiking. Jeremy's smirk widened. A little insurance policy. A bomb set to go off the moment I'm out of here. It's going to wipe out everything you've worked for. The evidence, the documents, everything. Arya's mind raced. She had to act fast. She couldn't let this madman get away with it, but at the same time, she had to figure out how to stop the bomb. She looked to Mark, her eyes full of raw emotion. You have to help me, Mark. We need to stop him. Mark's eyes flicked between Arya and his brother, caught in the middle of this dangerous game. How? He asked, his voice filled with desperation. What can we do? I don't know how to stop this. Arya stepped forward, her mind working quickly. We need to disarm the bomb, now. But we can't do it unless we're in the control room. Jeremy has to be stopped. Mark's brother chuckled, his eyes glinting with amusement. You really think you can stop me? You're too late. I've already set everything into motion. There's no way to undo it. But Arya wasn't listening to him anymore. She was already moving, grabbing Mark's hand and pulling him toward the back of the warehouse. The timer continued to tick, but she couldn't afford to waste another second. Mark, if you want to make things right, you need to help me. We have to stop him. Together. Mark looked torn, his face pale, but then he nodded. I'll help. I won't let him win. The sound of Jeremy's mocking laughter echoed through the warehouse, but it did little to deter Arya and Mark. They made their way to the small, dimly lit control room hidden in the back, where the bomb was connected to a central system. The room was locked, but Mark quickly hacked into the security panel, using his insider knowledge to get them inside. Arya's hands were steady, her mind laser-focused. She approached the bomb, scanning its configuration. It was complicated, with wires and circuits tangled together in a way that made it look nearly impossible to disarm. But Arya had been trained for this. Do you know how to disable it? Mark asked, his voice tight with anxiety. I can do it, Arya said firmly, her fingers already moving to cut the right wires. I've done it before. The clock was ticking down, each second like a hammer strike on her heart. She had no room for error. As she worked, her thoughts raced. Mark had been a pawn, manipulated by his own brother, but that didn't change the fact that he was part of this mess. She couldn't trust him completely, not yet. But right now, she needed his help. They had a shared goal, stopping Jeremy. Almost there, Arya muttered to herself, her eyes focused intently on the bomb's wiring. Just as she was about to make the final cut, she heard footsteps approaching. Mark's head snapped up, his eyes wide with fear. "He's coming," Arya cursed under her breath. She was so close. She just had to finish this. With a final, decisive move, she snipped the last wire. The timer went silent. For a moment, everything was still. Then, slowly, Arya exhaled, the tension leaving her body as she leaned back against the wall. It was over. The bomb was disabled. But Mark's brother wasn't finished. The door to the control room slammed open, and Jeremy stormed in, his face twisted in rage. "No!" he shouted. "You can't!" Before he could finish, Mark moved swiftly, tackling his brother to the ground. Arya didn't waste a second. She grabbed the gun she had hidden in her jacket and aimed it at Jeremy. "You've lost," Arya said coldly, her voice steady. "It's over." Jeremy stared up at her, a mixture of anger and disbelief in his eyes. He had underestimated her, and now he was paying the price. Mark held him down, his expression hard. "You're going to rot for this," Mark said, his voice low, filled with finality. The warehouse was eerily silent except for Jeremy's ragged breathing beneath Mark's grip. Arya kept her gun trained on him, her heart still hammering from the close call. The weight of what had just happened settled over her like a heavy storm. The bomb was disarmed, but this wasn't over yet. Jeremy's smirk had faded, replaced by a look of cold calculation. "You think you've won?" he sneered. "You have no idea what you've just done." Arya's finger twitched on the trigger. "I stopped a disaster." "That's what I did." Mark tightened his hold on Jeremy's arms. "You used me," he hissed, his voice shaking with anger. "I trusted you, and you turned me into your puppet." Jeremy let out a bitter laugh. "And you let it happen. Don't act innocent, Mark. You wanted to believe in me. You wanted to think you were doing something good." His eyes flicked toward Arya. "But she was always going to turn you against me, wasn't she?" Arya's jaw tightened. "You did that yourself." The distant wail of sirens reached her ears. Arya's team must have called in reinforcements. Soon, the place would be swarming with authorities, and Jeremy would finally face justice. Jeremy noticed it too. His smirk returned, but this time, it was tinged with something darker. "You think the law is going to keep me locked away? You don't know how deep this goes, Arya. I have friends in high places. You're only delaying the inevitable." Arya knew he wasn't bluffing. People like Jeremy didn't work alone. There were always more players in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Then I'll be ready," she said, voice unwavering. Mark looked at her, his expression conflicted. "What happens now?" Arya lowered her gun slightly, but her stance remained firm. "Now, we make sure Jeremy pays for what he's done. We follow every lead, every connection he has, and we take them down one by one." Jeremy sighed dramatically. "How noble. But you'll never outrun this game, Arya. You've already been pulled into it. And trust me, the people coming for you won't be as merciful as I was." Arya's grip on her weapon tightened. She had faced threats before. She had built a life in the shadows, surviving against impossible odds. But this was different. This wasn't just about stolen documents or government secrets anymore. This was a war, and Jeremy had just confirmed that it was far from over. The warehouse doors burst open as officers stormed in, weapons drawn. Mark released Jeremy and stepped back as the officers pinned him to the ground. Arya watched as Jeremy was hauled to his feet, his smirk never faltering. As he was led away, he met Arya's gaze one last time. "See you soon," he whispered before disappearing into the sea of officers. Arya exhaled slowly, forcing herself to push down the unease curling in her stomach. Mark stepped beside her, his hands still trembling. "I never wanted any of this," he admitted. "I thought I was doing the right thing." Arya studied him for a long moment. She had spent so much time doubting him, questioning his motives. But now, standing beside him as the sirens wailed in the distance, she saw the truth. He had been just as much a pawn as she had. "Then make it right," she said. "Help me finish this." Mark hesitated, then nodded. "I will." But deep down, Arya knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of a much bigger fight. And she had no choice but to win. Thanks for watching. For more stories, please subscribe Eververse Novel.